the Duke realized it was the same toy from the previous time. Leisel noticed that the boy really liked the stars. Chester immediately remembered how his brother had told him that his son really liked the stars, and when he looked at the night sky, he would break into a very cute and happy smile. Leisel noticed that the Duke was deep in thought again, probably wondering if the boy was real or not. If he accepted it, they could start getting closer, and she would feel better. The silence dragged on for a while, and Leisel thought perhaps she needed to intervene. She turned to his lordship and remarked that Lapel was a very responsible and caring child. He had taken care of her when she sprained her ligaments, and he was always reliable. He even sang magically, and she was sure the Duke had never had the chance to hear him sing. The Duke agreed, and Leisel asked if he would sing for His Highness. Leisel was very happy, because his little heart was about to receive a lethal dose of cuteness. No one could resist the charm of Lapel's singing. The boy was like a diamond in the darkness of the night, and even the Duke smiled a little as he listened. Chester suddenly became very embarrassed because he didn't understand why her eyes had lit up so suddenly. Leisel noticed him rubbing his eyes while the boy was singing, and perhaps it was a hint of fatigue. Leisel praised Lapel and asked His Highness how he liked the song. The atmosphere had returned to normal, and Chester thought he was imagining things. Leisel didn't understand why he had such mood swings. She really wanted him to make a simpler face and praise Lapel because the boy was looking forward to it. She turned to him twice and asked if he would continue to remain silent. Chester only saw her smiling, with eyes shining brightly, and he didn't understand what kind of trick this was. He had to leave before he blurted out some nonsense, so he reluctantly praised Lapel with a very displeased face, and immediately ran away. The boy was upset because he thought the Duke was angry because he sang badly. Leisel reassured him that it wasn't so. He simply had no ear for music, so he couldn't appreciate it at its true value. Just when Leisel thought things couldn't get worse, they witnessed another transformation in the Duke. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She was so beautiful. He thought it was probably just fatigue, and his eyes and brain were playing tricks on him. He just needed to rest. Ran turned to His Highness and asked if he was feeling well. The Duke remembered his training and realized he needed to study right now, so he started to run off. The butler didn't understand why he was acting so suddenly. Ran shouted that it was impossible for the Duke to leave, as things couldn't be postponed. Everything was idle for them. The servant informed Leisel that they had arrived and asked if she was sure everything would be all right, as they had arrived without warning. Leisel reassured him that everything would be fine. There were no formalities between them, and there would never be any. Casey told her brother that she was home and screamed for everyone to meet her. His lordship is busy right now," she said. Casey was upset because he most likely hadn't heard her, but she added that if the mountain wouldn't come to Mohammed, Mohammed would go to the mountain. The servant was about to tell her that in that case she should go outside because his lordship wasn't there. Leisel was eating with Lapel, who had finished his meal and was enjoying chocolate pudding for dessert. Casey couldn't find him anywhere, and her voice echoed as she called for him. Leisel was surprised and asked if they had a guest. The maid noted that the voice belonged to Lady Casey. Finally, Casey found them, but was very surprised when she saw Leisel and the boy there. She burst in and apologized, realizing that there were guests. Tita greeted her and informed her that his lordship was probably in his office. Leisel thought about it and realized that she seemed to be like that in the novel, but she didn't understand what kind of person Casey was. Casey asked if this boy was Lapel and expressed her joy that he had already been found. His red, bottomless eyes and black, fragrant hair immediately revealed that he was a child of the Helos family. Lapel started running toward Leisel, saying he was scared. Casey apologized, saying it was her fault and she hadn't meant to scare him. Leisel reassured him that everything was fine and that Casey wasn't scary at all. She didn't understand why the boy was still frightened. Casey then asked the lady who she was to the boy, assuming she was his nanny. She seemed to remember her now. This was the only daughter of Count Rashes. Casey explained that the Count and the Duke were close friends, so their children grew up together almost from childhood. That was why she could call Chester brother without hesitation. However, she felt a little impulsive and tactless, as if she and the Duke were really blood relatives. Leisel was afraid for Lapel's life, wondering if she should leave him in the care of such a girl. Casey remarked that the lady was too beautiful and young to be a nanny. After such an insight, Leisel decided to take back her words. She greeted the lady and introduced herself properly, explaining that she had some unresolved business with the Duke and would be staying here for a while. Casey immediately understood that this woman was the extravagant queen and quickly apologized for her earlier impoliteness. Leisel acknowledged that she used to be like that, but that was in the past, and there was no need to worry about her words. Casey's father always says that her tongue is her enemy, so she apologized again, adding that she called her Zelly. Leisel was surprised and asked if that was a nickname. Casey explained that it was an abbreviation of her full name. She had just met Leisel, yet was already addressing her like that. Afterward, the boy repeated Casey's words but mispronounced them, and Casey jokingly thought he was asking for jelly or marmalade. She then took out a gummy bear and showed him what her sister had. Leisel thought it was remarkable. Casey seemed to have a magic bag. She could hardly believe that such a large amount of marmalade was in such a small bag. If Leisel had mentioned that she liked it, Casey would have been ready to give it to her. The lady tried to say that it wasn't necessary, but Casey insisted that it could contain anything she wanted. It was a source of unlimited cash. Leisel was taken aback, but still agreed that it was a cool thing, and Casey was thrilled that she accepted her gift. She then asked if the boy was really theirs. Leisel confirmed it, adding that he hadn't yet passed the potion test. Casey thought she was the one who brought him here, and Leisel confirmed that she had. Suddenly, Leisel was bombarded with questions from Casey, who spoke rapidly. As they continued, Leisel realized that even Chester couldn't seem to find peace. Something was wrong. He needed to pull himself together and control his actions. The Duke was very angry and training aggressively. Ran asked him to calm down, suggesting that the knights might think he was taking his anger out on them. Chester explained that he didn't mean anything by it. He simply wanted them to understand that there was room for improvement, and that was his concern. Ran replied that if Chester didn't want to kill them with care, he should give them a break. The gentleman asked why Ram was there again, assuming he was loafing around. But Ram informed him that Lady Casey had arrived and was now speaking with Lady Leisel. The gentleman was very surprised and asked who she was talking to. He didn't understand why she hadn't come to him earlier and realized he should have moved faster. Ran asked his lordship to wait for him. They were already in Leisel's room. The butler was shocked, wondering if the Duke wanted to come in person. Ran suggested that he wait in the drawing room while he brought Lady Casey there. The gentleman noted that Ran knew her well, and she wouldn't agree to persuasion. He remarked that Ran's suggestion was a matter of politeness. Ran believed the Duke was worried that Lady Casey might blab something, or perhaps he was embarrassed by the revelation of his dark past to Lady Leisel. The Duke usually didn't care about such things, but he agreed that if Rand planned to continue his bullying, he shouldn't complain later about the mountain of paperwork. It seemed the butler had hit the nail on the head, and that was the whole reason for the Duke's haste. Casey remarked that she hadn't had this much fun in a long time. Leisel was enjoying herself too. Casey offered to give her a quick test, and Leisel agreed. Casey asked if Leisel knew Chester's nickname. Leisel was surprised and didn't know what to say. She wondered what would describe him more accurately. A cool, handsome man or a jerk? Everything else that came to mind contained swear words. Perhaps she shouldn't be so frank with her. So Leisel said she wasn't sure. Casey noted that if she heard that nickname, she would definitely think of him. She leaned in and whispered, "He's the mouth that ruins everything." After that, they started laughing, loudly, and Leisel noticed that it suited him very well. He was ideal. Leisel hadn't even realized when she had last had such fun, almost as if she had found a kindred spirit. Suddenly, someone knocked. It was the gentleman, asking if he could come in. Leisel let him in, and he apologized profusely for interrupting them, but she assured him it was no trouble. Chester then came in, asking Casey what had brought her here. The girl was scared and called him brother, then addressed him as His Highness. Leisel hoped he wasn't in the service, as she laughed at his nickname. The Duke said that if she had anything to say, she could say it in the living room. Leisel thought they were talking too loudly, and Casey agreed. Chester asked again, and the lady went out with them, saying they would discuss everything in the living room. Leisel said goodbye to Casey, and once they left, a boy immediately approached her. He asked why her uncle had not greeted him, believing that he had stopped loving him. Leisel denied it, saying that couldn't be true. She thought the boy must have overheard their laughter, but she reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. She hadn't given him that nickname. It would be rude to ignore a child, especially when he's a complete fool. Casey noted that Chester had asked why she was here, but she replied that it was obviously because her dad had told her to come. Chester then asked if she had said anything she might later regret. Casey answered, "Of course not," not understanding why she would discuss something personal with someone she didn't even know well. The gentleman then arrived, mentioning that she had something to say, though he seemed very long-winded about it. Casey quickly shifted the topic, asking if the boy had been found. She needed to change the subject before Chester began helping her. Chester said he wasn't sure yet because the potion hadn't been delivered. Leisel noted that she would never do such a thing. The boy simply lost his memory from shock, but the Duke believed it was better to be safe than sorry. Casey reassured her, saying that this girl could be trusted. She had heard her out and forgiven her. Chester, still confused, asked why Casey was calling her this girl when they had known each other for only 5 minutes. Casey remarked that it was a display of female solidarity, something she could understand. Chester commented that he knew that already, but Casey suddenly yelled at him for what he said. He agreed that she was beautiful, but the Duke interjected, saying that hadn't happened. Casey apologized for what she had heard. Chester nearly got caught in an awkward moment, and his symptoms were worsening. He had recently shone so brightly that he had to retreat immediately. The Duke thought perhaps it was some kind of mental illness. He decided Chester needed to see a doctor to find out if there were any mental disorders. Lapel, happy with the treats, expressed excitement about them. Leisel was surprised by how much he liked them, and the boy said she was cool, even a sorceress. Lapel asked for more treats, even suggesting he wanted a puppy. Leisel explained that she could only create 3 things in a short period, and the bag needed a break. For now, he had to make do with what he had. Lapel didn't mind and eagerly took the treats. Leisel, feeling exhausted, had been so distracted by the boy that she hadn't realized how tired she was. She was already falling asleep on the go. Despite needing a short rest, she couldn't leave the boy unattended. Lapel told her it was time for him to go home, but he also asked her to play with him, since he was sad to play alone. Leisel, still half asleep, realized he wanted to play with her. However, Lapel, being her protector, hesitated to wake her up. He opened the door but noticed no one was there. He decided it was time for hide and seek, needing to find everyone in the many rooms of the mansion. Tired of looking, he wandered into a room full of stars and was delighted. Meanwhile, Leisel woke up as though she had fallen into a coma. She realized Lapel was missing, and the door was wide open. Panic set in. She couldn't imagine where he had gone, and with such a vast mansion, he could be anywhere. She started looking for him, but silence was her only answer, meaning he must have gone far away. She encountered a maid and asked, terrified, if she had seen the boy. The maid shook her head, confirming she hadn't. Leisel had no idea what to do, but she was certain that if something happened to him, it would be her fault for falling asleep. Tia, the maid, suggested they look together. She would search the kitchen, maybe he had gone there. The Duke, on the other hand, was fuming. The doctor had confirmed that Lapel had no symptoms of any condition, but the Duke's concern had shifted to Leisel. He was beginning to suspect his own feelings for her. Chester, confused and feeling off, wondered why he felt like the Duke was smirking at him. Why was he heading in this direction? The Duke had made it clear that no one was to enter Lady Leisel's room without permission, but the door was open. Chester barged into the room, demanding to know who dared to disobey orders. Just then, he ran into Leisel, who was in tears and begging for help. The butler, horrified, asked what was going on. Leisel explained that Lapel had disappeared. She had accidentally fallen asleep, and when she woke up, he was gone. Ran reassured her to calm down. He would contact the others and they'd find him quickly. He was sure Lapel hadn't gone far. There were guards everywhere. Leisel blamed herself, but Ran insisted she stay calm, and he would bring news soon. Leisel, though, insisted on helping with the search. The Duke was furious. He had clearly ordered no one near the room without his permission, so who had disobeyed that order? He was determined to find the culprit and make sure they never did it again. Chester stormed into the room, demanding to know who had dared defy the order. Meanwhile, Lapel was very happy when he saw his uncle Chester. Chester didn't understand why Lapel was there, and the boy hugging the little star explained that he had found a place where all the stars hide during the day. He had discovered this room, where they were all so beautiful. Everyone had been hiding from him, but he had found them. Chester was confused. In all fairness, the boy should have been escorted out and scolded for being in this room, which was meant for someone else, but for some reason, he didn't want to do that. It was strange, but Lapel seemed to fit in. Lapel begged his uncle to play with him, but Chester refused. The boy insisted, as he was very bored playing alone. Eventually, Chester agreed, but only for a short time. Lapel said it was cool, but asked his uncle not to stand there, and instead to lie down and admire the stars with him. Lapel explained that if they lay down on the floor, the stars would shine even brighter. Chester lay down next to him, but he still didn't understand why Leisel wasn't there and why he was alone with Lapel. The boy explained that Leisel had fallen asleep, but he hadn't wanted to wake her up because he was her protector. Chester told Lapel to forget about the little spy and be careful with him, as he could easily blurt out too much in front of Leisel. The Duke had already made mistakes because of her influence. Despite the doctor saying there were no health issues, Chester was still concerned and thought the only right decision was to keep his distance from her. Lapel offered to sing Chester a song to keep him entertained. As he sang sweetly, Leisel suddenly appeared in front of them. Chester thought it was odd, like a mirage, since she hadn't been in the kitchen or anywhere else he usually saw her. The butler, having heard a boy's voice from the other side, was relieved to find that Lapel was safe. Leisel, worried and relieved at the same time, embraced him and scolded him for leaving without permission. The boy reassured her that he was fine and that he wasn't alone. He had the little star with him. The gentleman came out of the room and, seeing Leisel, became concerned. Chester, confused and trying to clear his head, asked the butler what was going on. The butler explained that they had been searching for the boy everywhere because Leisel had been so upset. Leisel apologized for causing such a commotion, and the gentleman acknowledged that he was partly to blame for not expecting her to be so worried. Grateful, Leisel thanked him, but suddenly she began to feel faint, and the butler caught her. She apologized for her legs giving way, explaining it was just nerves. The gentleman, noticing her distress, suggested she rest. She jumped up immediately, saying she could go, but Chester insisted she should rest. The boy, sensing her discomfort, told her to go faster so that the stars would help her and she wouldn't feel sick anymore. Leisel was surprised when she entered the room Lapel was playing in. The maid had told him that this time he wouldn't be able to get away from her so easily. Leisel noticed the calm in the Duke's mansion again, and for a moment everything seemed peaceful. She wondered when the potion would arrive, and she hoped to return home soon. It was clear that Lapel needed to adjust to his new surroundings, and Leisel felt that everything would work out for him. After all, he was the nephew of the stubborn Duke, so everything would be fine. She hadn't expected all the toys the Duke had bought for Lapel collected in one room. Perhaps Chester felt guilty for not being able to save his family, and that was why he tried so hard for his nephew. Leisel understood now that the Duke was willing to humble himself for the sake of Lapel's happiness. She found herself surprised by his efforts, and as she relaxed, she began thinking about leaving. She hoped to avoid changing the course of history, certain that the people in this mansion could overcome their struggles without her interference. She was sure that once she left, it would all end, and she would never see Lapel, the Duke, or the good people of the mansion again. She might visit occasionally, but that would be the limit of her involvement. Her thoughts were interrupted when the servants whispered about Chester. They were shocked, saying that Chester had caused the incident and that he had done it to inherit the title. They believed all his actions, searching for Lapel and trying to find the criminal, were just a pretense. Leisel, furious, confronted the servants, demanding to know who had spread such rumors. They were terrified and tried to cover up their words, but Leisel demanded they answer. She couldn't believe they would slander an innocent man like that. Just then, Chester, having overheard the gossip, decided to take a break. When he opened the window, he saw Leisel, who looked beautiful and embarrassed him when their eyes met. Meanwhile, the butler entered the room and, assuming his master was tired, offered him some tea, but the master declined, saying he wasn't in the mood. Ran asked Chester where he was going, and Chester replied that he was going for a walk. His head had finally cleared and he felt better. It was time to return. If he kept going straight, he would inevitably run into her. It was better to turn back before he lost control again. He didn't want to believe that these obsessive thoughts couldn't be controlled. He was sure there had to be a cure. Suddenly he heard voices. One of them was blaming him for everything. He was shocked. He was hearing this in his own estate. Chester decided that he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to return to his usual routine. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and he was certain it wouldn't be the last. Then he heard a female voice demanding to know who had spread such rumors. It was Leisel. Chester was surprised to see her. She asked the servants who had told them such things, and they tried to deflect, saying that everyone was talking about it. Leisel pointed out that if everyone was talking, it meant they had proof. The servants stammered, admitting they probably didn't have any evidence. Leisel, unimpressed, reminded them that they were servants and should not be spreading baseless rumors about the master of the house. It was clear they were tired of living, she said, and warned them to watch their language in the future. The Duke was not the kind of man who would behave like that, and she would not stand for such talk. She then asked them why they had gathered here today. They hadn't been given the day off, so they should be working, not gossiping. Chester stepped out of the bushes and asked Leisel if she planned to stay outside any longer, noting that the wind was picking up. Leisel was taken aback, surprised by how quickly he had appeared. She felt embarrassed. He had seen her, scolding the servants as if they were children. Determined to escape the situation, Leisel decided to leave and take Lapel back inside. The Duke offered to walk with her, which she assumed was because he was worried about the servants gossiping behind his back. Despite this, she didn't understand why he was following her. She knew she had to say something, so she apologized for the scene she had caused. The Duke, confused, didn't understand what she meant. Leisel explained that she was referring to the rumors. As a guest, she shouldn't have gotten involved, but she assumed he must have felt terrible, and it couldn't have been easy for him. The Duke assured her that everything was fine, and that she didn't need to worry about it. This answer surprised her. Leisel couldn't understand how he could remain so calm. He wasn't guilty of anything, so there should at least be some presumption of innocence, and he shouldn't remain silent, otherwise she wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Chester, slightly irritated, asked her how she could be so sure it wasn't him behind the rumors. Leisel responded that she was sure because he wasn't the type to do such things. She added that if he were guilty, he wouldn't have gone searching for Lapel, nor would he have bothered decorating the room with stars. Chester was taken aback. She acted as though they had known each other for years, and she seemed to understand him so well. Her complete trust in him, without any hint of doubt, made him feel strange. Leisel noticed the redness of his face and thought he might be in pain, but Chester assured her that he wasn't hurting anywhere. He was just feeling sick, maybe a chill or a fever, but he refused to let her check his forehead. Meanwhile, the maids discussed the situation, glad that only Leisel had scolded them. Regina, however, was suspicious of Leisel. She didn't trust her and thought she was playing a role in front of the Duke. She was concerned that Leisel was manipulating him and wanted her out of the picture. The chef, unsure whether Liesel's condition would improve, noted that the doctor had advised her to drink more fluids. Perhaps she had overexerted herself while playing with Lapel. It had been cool yesterday, so it wasn't surprising that she had suddenly fallen ill. The chef instructed the maid to check on Leisel and ask if she wanted any special dishes, as it would be a sin not to feed a sick person something comforting. Regina, still upset, bumped into Tia, who immediately apologized. Regina muttered about Tia being a strange assistant, but Tia just smiled and asked if she could help. After the guests had left, all she seemed to know how to do was disturb others. Regina reported that she had brought all the spices the chef had asked for. The lady, pretending to be sick, had been so committed to her role that a few days ago she had been searching for the boy with tears in her eyes, all for the sake of a fleeting but intense hug from Chester. Her scheme had worked the first time, and now she was shamelessly continuing it. However, their relationship wouldn't be destroyed by her dirty tricks. That day, Chester had chosen her, and nothing would change that. The chef thought the lady had suddenly become possessed. She had brought soup for the lady, urging her to eat it, and Lapel asked her not to die. The lady reassured him that she was fine, but the boy cried, accusing her of lying since she could barely move. Tia comforted Lapel, telling him not to worry because the lady would get better soon. Leisel asked the maid to take the boy away, fearing he might get sick. Tia agreed to take him for a walk, but Lapel refused to leave, saying he needed to stay with Leisel. After some insistence, Tia finally managed to take him away, urging Leisel to rest. Leisel was grateful for the help, but she knew she couldn't afford to stay in bed for long. Her immunity was weak, and she didn't understand how she could fall ill from a simple walk. She had been here for 3 weeks now, and soon she would have to say goodbye to Lapel. She needed to get back on her feet quickly and spend more time with him. Chester, meanwhile, kept thinking these were symptoms of some strange disease, but after looking through all the books, he realized it could only mean one thing. He had fallen in love with her. He couldn't believe it. It was simply unbelievable and unthinkable. She wasn't extravagant as rumours suggested, and he was sure she doted on the boy. There was no talk of violence, but the fact that he had fallen for her in such a way felt strange. Determined to make sense of his feelings, Chester decided to review some books again. As he remembered her, he realized he was losing his mind. These thoughts, these mirages, were constantly occurring. Ran, the butler, approached and asked if Chester had finished with the documents. Chester was surprised. Hadn't he asked Ran to wait? He'd told him he would handle the documents soon. Then, Chester asked Ran what he liked most about his wife. Ran was confused, not understanding the intent behind the question. Chester commented that there must be something about her that made him marry her, which caused Ran to grow uncomfortable. He suspected something was off with his master. The sudden interest in Lady Leisel was a change, and his intuition told him it had to do with something deeper. Chester, noticing Ran's hesitation, asked him not to look at him that way, or he would feel awkward. Ran, ever the expert in such matters, advised Chester that love was something hard to explain. Sometimes it simply happened. You could wake up one morning and realize that you loved someone. Chester, though skeptical, listened as Ran continued, saying that love was more about people's feelings and their ability to compromise than any specific event. He didn't believe that everything Chester had been doing could be explained by anything other than love. Suddenly the maid knocked on the door and asked if she could enter. Chester granted permission, and she informed him that Lapel wanted to see him. Chester didn't mind and asked if something was wrong. The boy ran in, shouting that Leisel had died. Chester immediately corrected him. She had only caught a cold. Leisel was afraid she might infect the boy, so they had made sure he stayed away from her. The maid explained that she was still feverish and resting in her room. Ran saw this as Chester's opportunity and urged him to court the lady. Chester was perplexed by what Ran was suggesting, but soon found himself holding a bouquet of flowers that the butler had handed him. Ran had suggested he pick some flowers which were in season, and even mentioned that they had medicinal properties to help with fever. He assured Chester that it was necessary to help the lady recover faster. Despite his hesitation, Chester decided to visit her. He wasn't sure if the flowers were truly needed, but Ran's insistence made him feel as though it was the right thing to do. As Chester approached her room, he thought about what Ran had whispered in his ear. All women liked such gestures, and Chester should act on his feelings. When he reached her room, Leisel greeted him quietly, not understanding why he had come. She wanted to rest, but she allowed him to enter. Chester stood there, unsure of what to say. The butler, shocked by his master's behaviour, hoped that Chester hadn't forgotten how to speak. Chester remembered Ran's advice about romantic gestures, so he presented the bouquet to Leisel. She asked what kind of flowers they were, and Chester said he had found them on the way. Ran, watching from a distance, hoped this wouldn't be misinterpreted as a romantic gesture. But it seemed that Chester had indeed taken a step forward in his feelings for her. After handing the bouquet to the lady, Chester realized that something must have gone wrong. Tia entered the room, announcing that she had brought boiling water. Leisel was surprised, as she hadn't requested it. The Duke remarked that it would definitely be useful and handed her a glass of warm water. He added that he had heard these flowers could help with colds and were already clean, so she could use them without further preparation. As Leisel looked at him, she couldn't help but think that Chester was acting like a charming gentleman, seemingly so gallant and sweet. If he continued like this, she thought, he could win any woman's heart. But suddenly she realized she wasn't thinking about him in that way anymore. Moreover, it was Tia's job to care for her, so she didn't understand why he had come to her room with such gestures. Was there a catch? Chester, sensing the tension, suggested that she try the warm water, perhaps subtly implying that she shouldn't infect the boy. Leisel responded, saying that she preferred to be alone to avoid accidentally infecting anyone, so he needn't worry about her. Chester was taken aback and asked again, as if still unsure. Leisel, in turn, remarked that she couldn't believe he had gone through all this trouble just so she wouldn't infect Lapel. He could have simply told her. Ran, noticing Chester's confusion, became worried. The Duke seemed frozen by the sharpness in Leisel's response. At that moment, a servant entered and announced that the gentleman was waiting for Chester to review the city documents, meaning it was time to get back to work. Frustrated, Chester shouted that he had trusted Ran, but couldn't understand why his plan had failed. Ran noted that it was a normal reaction, given how Chester had treated her, like a fraud since the beginning. Naturally, she wouldn't respond warmly to his gifts right away. Chester was stunned. He had never considered this angle. Ran told him to think for himself. He had long been dismissive of her, so it wasn't surprising she hadn't opened up to him. Chester still couldn't figure out what to do. Ran suggested he needed to slowly resolve the misunderstandings between them, instead of expecting everything to be fixed with one gesture. Chester had thought that simply waiting for the potion to take effect would be enough. But now, he found himself completely unsure about what had gone wrong. Everything felt out of place, and he could feel himself distancing from his original goal. Ran reminded him to be more careful in the future, promising not to put him in an awkward position again. As Chester reflected on everything, he realized that his approach had been a waste of time. His mission had shifted from winning her trust to managing a situation he hadn't anticipated. He needed to act quickly. There was no longer any time to waste. Just then, the knight entered and mentioned that the commander was looking for Chester. Chester nodded and made his way toward him, knowing that today he had a task to focus on, whether he was ready or not. After the child, it seemed they wanted to assign him something else. The commander informed him that he had called him regarding a request for assistance with a carriage crash incident. They now needed people for a second investigation, which is why he invited him. Kay knew it would involve an investigation, so he frankly admitted that he didn't think he was good enough to be involved. The commander was confused by this sudden change, as Kay had shown interest before. It wasn't the Kay the commander knew. Some had even said that he had been training less diligently recently. It seemed something had happened. Kay quickly denied any such change, explaining that he had simply been feeling a bit tired lately. He assured the commander that he would train harder and, of course, could be included in the investigation. The commander acknowledged that Kay was a good guy, but reminded him not to relax too much. He couldn't afford to be complacent, especially when dealing with such serious matters. As for the investigation, Kay felt he was being treated like a fifth wheel, under constant surveillance. He had climbed a tree earlier and had decided that he no longer needed to be in that situation. His body fell from the tree, and it would have been strange if he simply disappeared, so he left himself there for now. The memories of his time spent in the stone had already faded, and he was ready to move on. Leisel, meanwhile, was dealing with a different matter. She had sold a rare bag, which left Casey in shock. She couldn't understand why Leisel would sell such an item, but Leisel replied that it was necessary to get rid of unnecessary things. Later, Lapel called Leisel and listed the names of some items he had mentioned, to which Leisel commented that they were very impressive names. She even called Lapel a genius for his taste. Casey didn't understand why they were calling him a genius over a list of names, but Leisel added that there was something elegant about them. Leisel sneezed, and Casey asked if her cold had passed. Leisel assured her that it was over, and simply thought the room had been chilly. She was about to close the window when a cat suddenly jumped in. The cat's appearance was unexpected, and Leisel didn't know where it had come from, but Lapel was delighted. Casey, taken by the cat's beauty, tried to pet it, but the cat rejected her. She didn't understand why the cat had turned away from her, considering she could have pampered it for life. Leisel reminded her that cats could only be petted with their permission. The cat then walked towards Lapel, and he was thrilled, thinking it wanted him to pet it. Meanwhile, the cat sat comfortably on Leisel's lap, much to Casey's excitement. Lapel commented that Leisel was very cool, and that the cat seemed to enjoy her company. Casey, feeling jealous, wished she could pet the cat too, but Leisel's calm approach had won the cat's affection. Chester, back at home, was surprised to learn that Casey had come to his house. It seemed that Leisel had been gossiping about him, though Chester didn't think Leisel liked that sort of thing. However, he wasn't sure whether Casey was gossiping too. It annoyed him, so he decided it was time to send her home. Ran, the butler, was surprised to see Chester leaving when he had wanted to speak with him. Chester told him to come back later, since he had urgent business. Ran insisted that it was of utmost importance, and Chester reluctantly agreed to listen. The butler informed him that the potion had arrived. The magician had found one and immediately sent it. He also mentioned that it would be sufficient to test just one child. Chester was pleased with the news and praised the butler. Ran asked if he could call Leisel and Lapel right away to use the potion, but Chester hesitated. He didn't want to tell Leisel yet and preferred to keep the investigation confidential. Ran was taken aback by this response, but Chester insisted that they wouldn't tell her just yet. The butler then asked if the potion needed to be returned, to which Chester replied that it would not be necessary. He would keep it for now. Chester's mind was clearly preoccupied with Leisel, and Ran noticed it. He remarked that Chester didn't want to let her go home so soon. Chester hadn't even realized that his desire to keep her around had clouded his judgment. The palace was the last place he needed to be, but he had to stay focused. He ordered the potion to be prepared and decided he would bring it to Lapel himself.